I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not special. I am a xenobiologist from a small town in Colorado who happened to score high enough on the Union compatibility exams to earn a seat aboard an alien research vessel. I eat cereal for dinner. I sometimes forget to water my plants. I am, by every reasonable measure, an ordinary human being. And that is exactly why what they found in my blood terrified them. I had been aboard the Athara's Light for 3 months when they called me to the Genomic Archive. 3 months of walking through corridors designed for creatures twice my height. 3 months of eating nutritional paste that tasted like someone had described food to a machine that had never seen any. 3 months of being stared at, like I was a curiosity in a museum that no one had bothered to label yet. The Galactic Union had existed for 12,000 years, 400 species, countless worlds. They had built wonders that made our greatest achievements look like a child stacking blocks. And Earth had only made first contact 6 years ago. We were the new kids. We were provisional members, which is a polite way of saying they let us sit at the table, but hadn't decided yet if we deserved a plate. So when Torvan, the ship's lead geneticist, summoned me for what he called a routine genetic cataloging, I didn't think much of it. Every species that joined the Union went through the process. A blood sample, a scan, a file added to the archive. Simple, boring, administrative. I walked into the archive wing and found Torvan waiting beside a sequencing console that hummed with a low, almost musical vibration. He was Selessi, tall, gray-skinned, 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on a face that seemed permanently unimpressed. He had the demeanor of a professor who had long ago stopped expecting his students to surprise him. "Dr. Cole," he said, gesturing toward the sample chair. "This will take only a few minutes. A simple strand mapping. Nothing invasive." "You make it sound like a dentist visit," I said. He stared at me with all 4 eyes. "I do not know what a dentist is. Consider yourself lucky." He did not laugh. I was getting used to that. Humor, I had learned, did not translate well across species. The Cathari found repetition funny. The Dravine laughed at loud noises. The Selessi, as far as I could tell, did not laugh at all. I sat down. He drew a small blood sample. Painless. He placed it into the sequencer, and the machine pulsed with soft light as it began its work. I watched the data scroll across the console in symbols I could not read, and I waited. It took 4 minutes. Torvan glanced at the readout the way you might glance at a grocery receipt. Then he stopped. His 4 eyes narrowed in sequence, top to bottom, which I had learned was the Selessi equivalent of a frown. He tapped the console. He recalibrated something. He ran the scan again. I sat up straighter. "Problem?" "No," he said too quickly. "An error in the calibration. 1 moment." The second scan finished. He stared at it longer this time. Then he pressed a communication panel on the wall and spoke in rapid sacation that my translator could barely keep up with. Something about verification. Something about contamination protocols. 2 minutes later, Ilvari arrived. She was Cathari, an insectoid species with iridescent wings folded against her back and mandibles that clicked softly when she was thinking. She was the archive's secondary geneticist, and she looked annoyed at being pulled from whatever she had been doing. Then she looked at the console. The clicking stopped. They spoke to each other in low tones. Ilvari pointed at something on the display. Torvan shook his head. Ilvari pointed again, more insistently. Torvan drew a fresh sample from the vial and ran the scan a 3rd time. I was not a geneticist, but I knew enough about science to understand that when researchers run the same test 3 times, they are not dealing with a calibration error. They are dealing with a result they do not want to believe. The 3rd scan matched the first 2. Torvan turned to me. In 3 months, I had never seen emotion on his face. I saw it now. It was not fear, not exactly. It was the expression of someone who had just opened a door they had always assumed was a wall. "Dr. Cole," he said slowly, "have you been genetically modified?" "No." "Are you certain? Any procedures? Any treatments? Any experimental?" "I'm certain. I'm baseline human. No modifications." "Why?" He looked at Ilvari. She clicked once. He looked back at me. "This is not possible," he said. "No single species should have this." They called Grand Curator Sethahal. If Torvan was a professor, Sethahal was the university itself. He was Yaren, a species that resembled what you might get if a tortoise had evolved to be 7 feet tall and lived for thousands of years. He moved slowly, spoke carefully, and carried the kind of authority that did not need to be announced. When Sethal entered a room, even the air seemed to pay attention. He reviewed the results on the console. He reviewed them again. Then he lowered himself into a seat that groaned under his weight and folded his massive hands together. "Show me the comparison index," he said. Torvald pulled up a display that filled half the wall. My genetic profile on one side, 12 other species on the other, lines of code, color-coded, annotated in symbols I could not read. But I could see the patterns. I could see where the lines connected in ways that clearly were not supposed to connect. Sethal began to explain, and the more he talked, the quieter the room became. First, he told me about the junk. Human DNA, he said, contains enormous stretches of code that your scientists have long dismissed as non-functional. Evolutionary leftovers, genetic noise. But the archive's deep scanner could read deeper than anything on Earth, and what it found was not noise. It was dormant programming. Thousands of latent genetic sequences, coiled and sleeping, more complex than the active genome of most species in the Union. Torvald compared it to finding a personal computing device that secretly contained the processing core of a warship. "It is all there," Torvald said, his voice flat with disbelief. "It is just not turned on." Then there was the mutation rate. Human DNA, Sethal explained, mutates at a speed that should be fatal to any species. Most organisms with that level of genetic instability collapse within a few thousand generations. They do not adapt. They disintegrate. But humans had not disintegrated. Their genome contained error correction mechanisms that did not prevent mutation, but instead seemed to guide it, to select for it, to use chaos as a tool. Sethal called it guided chaos. He said it as if the words themselves unsettled him. Then came the part that made Ilvari's wings unfold for the first time since I had met her. There were gene sequences in my DNA that matched fragments from 6 other species in the archive. 6 species from 6 different worlds scattered across the galaxy. Some of them had gone extinct millions of years before humans ever existed. There was no evolutionary pathway that could explain those sequences appearing in a species from a small planet in an unremarkable solar system on the galaxy's edge. "This was not evolved," Torvald said. He paused, and I could see him weighing the word before he said it. "This was engineered." The room was very quiet. And then Sethal told me about the marker. Deep in the human genome, buried beneath layers of code that no Earth-based technology could have reached, the scanner had found a genetic signature, a specific, unmistakable pattern that the archive had only ever recorded in one other place. The Architects. I knew the name. Everyone in the Union did. The Architects were the great mystery of galactic civilization, a precursor race, impossibly advanced, believed to have seeded life across thousands of worlds before vanishing without explanation millions of years ago. They were half science, half religion. Some species worshipped them, others denied they had ever existed. But the archive had fragments of their genetic code, recovered from ancient sites scattered across the galaxy, and that code contained a specific marker, a signature, a fingerprint. No living species in the Union carried that marker. It had been extinct for longer than most civilizations had existed, until my blood hit their scanner. Sethal looked at me with eyes that had seen millennia pass, and I saw something in them I had never expected to see directed at a human. It was not pity, it was not condescension. It was recognition. "Dr. Cole," he said, "your species was not meant to join the Union. According to this, you were meant to inherit it." I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. Word spread the way it always does on a ship. By dinner, every corridor was different. Crew members who had walked past me for 3 months without a glance now stepped aside when I approached. The Dravine security chief, a massive creature who breathed methane and had once called humans soft and breakable within earshot, lowered his head as I passed. Not a bow. Something deeper. Something involuntary. I did not want it. I did not ask for it, but I understood it. They were afraid, not of me, of what I represented, because the Union's founding charter, written 12,000 years ago, contained a clause that most species treated as ceremonial, a provision granting sovereign authority to any species carrying verified architect lineage. It had never been invoked. It had never needed to be. It was a relic, a nod to mythology, a line in a document that everyone assumed would never matter. And now a species that had been in the Union for 6 years, a species that still used chemical rockets and argued about the shape of its own planet a few centuries ago, had just activated it. Councillor Revan, a Selessi diplomat with a voice like cold metal, called an emergency tribunal. I was summoned. I walked into a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them looking at me as if I were a device they could not determine was a tool or a threat. Revan spoke first. She argued the results should be sealed, suppressed. She said the political implications were catastrophic. She said humans were not ready for the responsibility the Charter would grant them. She said a lot of things that boiled down to one simple truth. She was afraid of losing power. Then they turned to me. They wanted answers. They wanted explanations. They wanted me to account for something written into my blood before my species had even learned to walk upright. I stood there for a moment, looking at all of them. 400 species, 12,000 years of civilization, and they were all looking at one ordinary woman from Colorado, waiting for her to explain why her DNA carried the signature of gods. I did not have the answer they wanted, so I gave them the truth. I did not know, I said. None of us knew, and honestly, it does not change anything. Revan started to object. I kept talking. You are looking at my DNA and seeing a blueprint, a design, something planned. And maybe it was. Maybe someone, millions of years ago, built something into us that we were never meant to find this soon. But here is what I need you to understand. We did not know. We have never known. And we still did everything we did. I looked around the room. We crossed oceans in wooden boats because we wanted to know what was on the other side. We split the atom because we wanted to understand what things were made of. We walked on our moon in ships held together with rivets and prayers because the idea of not trying was worse than the idea of failing. We did all of that with no instruction manual, no grand design that we could see, no one telling us we were special. My voice was steady. I was surprised by that. You are afraid because our DNA carries a fingerprint you recognize. But we built our entire civilization without ever seeing that fingerprint. We did not need a birthright to reach the stars. We just refused to stay on the ground. The chamber was silent. Sethal spoke last. He spoke slowly, the way someone speaks when they want every word to be remembered. In 12,000 years, he said, no species has ever arrived at the Union already carrying the fire. They all had to be given it. He looked at me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something ancient in his eyes soften. You brought your own. Nobody spoke after that. The tribunal ended without a vote. I walked back to my quarters alone, through corridors that somehow felt wider than they had that morning. I sat on the edge of my bunk and looked out the viewport at the stars. Thousands of them, millions. Each one a sun, with worlds I would never see, orbiting in patterns I would never fully understand. I opened my personal log and recorded a message, not to any government, not to any institution, just to the record, just so someone, someday, would know what it felt like to be standing in this moment. I think I understand now, I said, why we always looked up, why we never felt quite finished, why every answer we found just gave us a bigger question. We were not searching for something new, we were remembering something old. Something written so deep inside us that we could only feel it as hunger, as restlessness, as the thing that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and makes you walk outside just to look at the sky. I paused. The stars held still. They scanned our blood, expecting to find another ordinary species. Instead, they found a blueprint and the terrifying realization that we had already started building without the instructions. I closed the log. Somewhere in the archive, my file was being reclassified, not under provisional species, not under standard membership, under a category that had not been used in millions of years. I did not feel different. I still ate cereal for dinner. I still forgot to water my plants. But the galaxy felt smaller now, and for the first time in 3 months, nobody on that ship looked at me like I did not belong.